Jesus asked one question, and the greatest Bible experts in Israel had no answer. These were men who had memorized scripture since childhood, men who debated theology for a living. And yet one question from Jesus shut the entire room down. No arguments, no explanations, just silence. And the reason is shocking. Jesus exposed them using a verse they already knew, a verse they had read, sung, and studied their entire lives, but they had never truly understood it. One verse, one question. And suddenly, the most educated Bible scholars in Israel realized something terrifying. If Jesus was right, then the Messiah was standing right in front of them. Jerusalem, around 30 AD. By now, Jesus has become impossible to ignore. Crowds follow him everywhere. The blind see, the lame walk, the sick are healed. Thousands have been fed from a few loaves of bread. But what unsettles the religious leaders most is not the miracles. It's the way Jesus teaches. He doesn't quote famous rabbis. He doesn't appeal to tradition. He speaks with authority, and that threatens the people who normally control religion. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, they are the recognized experts of Israel, the interpreters of Scripture, the guardians of the law, but Jesus keeps exposing their hypocrisy. At one point, he tells them, "You strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel." Matthew 23:24. In other words, you're obsessed with tiny religious details, but blind to the heart of God. That kind of accusation creates enemies. So the leaders begin a strategy. If they can't stop Jesus with authority, maybe they can trap him with questions. First comes the political trap. Should we pay taxes to Caesar? If Jesus says yes, the crowds will hate him. If he says no, Rome could arrest him. Jesus simply asks, whose image is on the coin? Caesar's. Then he replies, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. Matthew 22:21. Trap destroyed. Next come the Sadducees. They reject the resurrection, so they invent a complicated story about a woman marrying 7 brothers. They expect Jesus to stumble. Instead, he says, you are mistaken because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. Matthew 22:29. Another trap collapses. Again and again they attack. Again and again Jesus answers effortlessly. Then something unexpected happens. Jesus stops answering questions and asks one instead. Jesus looks directly at the Pharisees and asks something that sounds almost too simple. What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he? Matthew 22:42. The answer is immediate. The son of David. Everyone knows this. For centuries, Israel had waited for a king from David's line. God promised David, I will raise up your offspring after you and establish his kingdom forever. 2 Samuel 7:12-13. So the expectation was clear. The Messiah would be a descendant of David, a future king, a deliverer, a ruler who restores Israel. The Pharisees answer confidently, case closed, or so they think. Then Jesus asked one more question, and suddenly everything changes. Jesus says, how is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? Then he quotes one verse from Psalm 110. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. Psalm 110:1. Now think carefully. David wrote that psalm, David the king, the greatest king Israel had ever known. And in this psalm, David calls the coming Messiah, my Lord. That should make no sense, because the Messiah is supposed to be David's descendant, his offspring, his future son. But kings do not call their descendants Lord. Fathers do not bow to their sons. The greater does not submit to the lesser. So why would David say this, unless the Messiah is more than David's son? Suddenly, the room grows quiet. The Pharisees know Psalm 110. They've studied it for years, they've recited it in worship, but now the implication is unavoidable. If David calls the Messiah Lord, then the Messiah must be greater than David, greater than Israel's greatest king. And there is only one person standing in that courtyard claiming that kind of authority: Jesus. Matthew records the moment simply. No one could say a word in reply. Matthew 22:46. The greatest Bible scholars in Israel are completely silent. Jesus had just revealed something profound. The Messiah is not only David's son, he is David's Lord. Both things are true. The Messiah would come from David's line, a real human king. But he would also sit at the right hand of God, which means his authority comes from heaven itself. This is why Psalm 110 becomes one of the most quoted passages in the New Testament, because it points directly to Jesus. He is both the Son of David and the Lord of David, fully human and fully divine. The Pharisees didn't stay silent because they lacked knowledge. They knew the scriptures. The real problem was something deeper. If they admitted what Jesus was showing them, they would have to admit who he really was. And that meant surrender. Surrendering their authority, their pride, their control, so they chose the safer option: silence. That conversation happened nearly 2,000 years ago, but the question Jesus asked that day has never disappeared. What do you think about the Messiah? Not as an idea, not as a historical figure, but as Lord. Because if Jesus is only a wise teacher, you can admire him and move on. But if he is truly the Son of David and the Lord of David, then ignoring him is not really possible. Sooner or later, everyone must answer the same question the Pharisees faced. Who is Jesus, and what will you do with him? The Pharisees chose silence. Your answer is still being written.